Get out of my sight, you worthless beggar. 23-year-old Roberto Mendoza stood frozen in the doorway of his childhood home, rainwater already soaking through his thin jacket, as his older brother Hector shoved a crumpled paper bag into his chest. Inside was nothing but an old, rusted toolbox their father had left behind. Tools so worn and outdated that even the local junkyard had refused them. "This is all you deserve," Hector spat. "Dad wasted enough money on your business ideas. Now that he's gone, I'm selling this house and you're not getting a cent." But 15 years later, this same humiliated young man would become the founder of Mendoza Construction Empire, employing over 800 people and building homes for those who had nothing, just like him. But before we begin this inspiring story, comment below which city you're watching from and leave your like so we can continue following along. Roberto had always believed family meant everything. His father, Miguel Mendoza, had raised him and Hector alone after their mother passed when Roberto was 8. Miguel had been a simple handyman, but he taught his sons that honest work built character. While Hector learned to manage money and pursued accounting, Roberto learned to fix things: plumbing, electricity, carpentry. He dreamed of building something bigger, a real construction company. When their father died suddenly of a heart attack at 62, everything changed on a Tuesday. Roberto sat in the lawyer's office, his hands trembling as the will was read. Miguel had left the family home and his savings, nearly 180,000 pesos, to Hector, the eldest. To Roberto, he left only his old toolbox and a handwritten note. "Build something beautiful, mijo. You have the hands for it." Hector's face had twisted into a sneer. "See? Even Dad knew you were the charity case." "Hector, that's not—" Roberto started. "I'm selling the house," Hector interrupted, his voice cold and calculated. "The market's good right now. I'll get at least 2 million for it. You have 1 week to get your stuff out, but this is our home. Where am I supposed to go?" "That's not my problem. You're 23 years old, Roberto. Figure it out." 6 days later, Roberto stood in the November drizzle outside the house where he'd grown up, everything he owned stuffed into 2 duffel bags. Hector appeared at the door, impeccably dressed as always, holding that paper bag. "Almost forgot," Hector said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Your inheritance. Dad's junk tools. Maybe you can sell them for bus fare." The toolbox inside was a disgrace. Rusty wrenches, a chipped hammer, bent screwdrivers, a level with a cracked vial. Tools that had built 1,000 repairs, fixed 100 problems, but now looked like trash from another era. "Hector, please, can't we work something out? I could pay you rent, You could what? You don't even have a real job. You've been planning your business for 3 years while living off Dad's generosity. That ends now. Grow up." The door slammed. The lock clicked. Roberto stood there as the rain intensified, soaking through to his skin. He had 847 pesos in his pocket, everything he'd saved from odd jobs. No apartment, no prospects, just a bag of useless tools and a brother's contempt burning in his chest. That first night, Roberto slept in a bus shelter on the outskirts of Ciudad Juarez. The cold November wind cut through his jacket, and the metal bench dug into his hip no matter how he positioned himself. He clutched his duffel bags close, terrified someone would steal even these meager possessions. Around 2 in the morning, he finally let himself cry. Not quiet tears, but deep, shaking sobs that came from somewhere primal. He thought about his father's calloused hands teaching him to use a level. His father's patient voice explaining why precision mattered. He thought about his mother's laugh, a sound he could barely remember now. "I will not die here," he whispered into the darkness, his voice hoarse. "I will not." The war had just begun. Roberto quickly learned that sleeping rough meant constant vigilance. He found a boarding house in the poorest barrio where 150 pesos per week bought him a narrow bed in a room shared with 3 other men. An elderly factory worker, a young musician, and a man who never spoke and disappeared for days at a time. His 847 pesos needed to stretch impossibly far. He bought the cheapest food, beans, tortillas, the bruised vegetables vendors sold at day's end. His stomach cramped constantly those first weeks, but Roberto had his father's tools, worthless as everyone claimed. On his second day, he walked through neighborhoods until his feet blistered looking for work. At a small corner store, he noticed the owner struggling with a broken door hinge. "Señor, I can fix that," Roberto offered. The owner, Don Ernesto, a weathered man in his 60s, looked skeptical. "You have tools?" Roberto showed him the rusty toolbox. Don Ernesto laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine surprise. "Those are antiques. My father had tools like these." "They still work," Roberto said quietly. "Fix my door. If you do good work, I'll pay you 50 pesos. Roberto's hands remembered what his mind doubted. He removed the old hinge, jimmied the screws free despite their rust, and rehung the door so it swung smooth and silent. It took him 40 minutes. Don Ernesto tested the door, opening and closing it with growing approval. "You have your father's hands, don't you?" Roberto's throat tightened. "How did you know? Only a father teaches that kind of patience." Don Ernesto paid him 100 pesos, double the promised rate. "Come back Thursday. My bathroom sink leaks." That night, Roberto ate a real meal, chicken and rice from a food stall, and cried again. But these tears tasted different. They tasted like possibility. Word spread slowly in the barrio. Someone needed a fence repaired. Someone's electrical outlet sparked. A grandmother's kitchen cabinet door hung crooked. Roberto took every job, no matter how small, no matter how far he had to walk. His pricing strategy was simple. Charge less than anyone else. Work twice as hard. Never leave until the customer smiled. By the end of month 1, Roberto had earned 2,340 pesos. He'd spent 1,100 on food, rent, and bus fare to jobs farther away. He saved 1,240 pesos, hiding it in his sock at the boarding house. Month 2 brought his first major challenge. A young couple, Eduardo and Luz, hired him to renovate their tiny kitchen, new tiles, fix the plumbing, install a used cabinet they'd bought. The job would pay 800 pesos, but Roberto needed to buy supplies, grout, pipes, basic materials. He had only 600 pesos saved after paying rent. "I need a loan," he told Don Ernesto, swallowing his pride. "Just 400 pesos. I'll pay you back with interest from the next job." Don Ernesto studied him. "Why should I trust you?" "Because when I say I'll do something, I do it. You've seen that." Don Ernesto loaned him 500 pesos at 0 interest. "Pay me back when you can. And mijo, stop hiding money in your sock. Someone will rob you. Open a bank account." The kitchen job took Roberto 6 days of 12-hour shifts. His back screamed. His hands cracked and bled from the tile work. But when Eduardo and Luz saw the finished kitchen, modest but clean, professional, beautiful, Luz actually hugged him. "It's perfect," she whispered. "We've been saving for 3 years for this." They paid him 1,000 pesos, adding 200 as a tip. Eduardo shook his hand firmly. "You need business cards. I know a guy who prints them cheap." By month 3, Roberto had business cards that read, "R. Mendoza, honest repairs, no job too small." He'd paid back Don Ernesto, saved 3,200 pesos, and had a list of 12 people waiting for his services. He bought his first new tool, a power drill. It cost 450 pesos and felt like a throne. Spring arrived, bringing construction season. Roberto noticed that many small contractors needed extra hands, day laborers who could do skilled work. He showed up at construction sites at dawn, offering his services. A contractor named Arturo, a bear of a man with sun-darkened skin and a suspicious eye, hired him for a day. "I'll pay you 200 pesos if you can install this entire bathroom by tonight. Miss a single detail, you get nothing." Roberto installed pipes, mounted a toilet, connected a sink, tiled the shower wall, and caulked every seam. He finished at 11 p.m., working by flashlight for the final hour. Arturo inspected everything with a level and a critical eye. Finally he nodded. "You're hired. 3 times a week, 250 pesos per day. Show up late, you're fired." This changed everything. Roberto now had steady income, 750 pesos weekly from Arturo, plus another 801,000 from his private clients on other days. He was earning between 7,000 and 8,000 pesos monthly. He moved out of the boarding house into a tiny studio apartment, just one room with a bathroom, but it was his. Rent was 200 pesos monthly. He bought a used mattress, a small table, and his second new tool, a compound miter saw. By month 6, Roberto had saved 23,000 pesos. But more importantly, he'd learned something crucial. The real money wasn't in day labor. It was in contracts. Arturo was billing clients 15,000 pesos for jobs Roberto did the bulk of work on, paying Roberto only 2,000, 3,000 pesos. Roberto wasn't bitter. He was observant. He was learning. One suffocating July evening, Roberto met Doña Carmen, an elderly woman who ran a small restaurant near the market. Her kitchen was a disaster. Ancient plumbing, dangerous wiring, walls that hadn't been painted since the previous century. "Can you fix all this?" she asked, her voice heavy with worry. "The health inspector says if I don't renovate, he'll close me down. But every contractor I've talked to wants 40,000 pesos. I don't have that kind of money." Roberto walked through her kitchen, making notes, calculating. He could do this job for 25,000 pesos in materials and still deliver quality work. But he'd need to work on it full-time for 3 weeks. "I can do it for 32,000 pesos, he said. "That includes everything, materials, labor, permits. You'll have a kitchen that passes any inspection." Doña Carmen's eyes filled with tears. "That's still more than I have, mijo. Pay me 15,000 now for materials. The rest you can pay in installments over 6 months. No interest. Why would you trust me like that?" Roberto thought about Don Ernesto's loan, about Eduardo and Luz's hug, about his father's note. "Because someone trusted me once. That's how this works." He quit working for Arturo, who called him an ungrateful fool, and dove into Doña Carmen's kitchen. The July sun beat down like molten lead, and the kitchen's poor ventilation turned it into an oven. Roberto worked from dawn until midnight, sleeping only 4 hours a night. Halfway through, disaster struck. The plumbing was worse than he'd estimated. He needed 3,000 pesos more in materials. Money he didn't have. Money he couldn't ask Doña Carmen for. Roberto stood in that sweltering kitchen at 2 in the morning, sweat and tears mixing on his face. He could walk away, return the deposit, admit defeat, or he could find another way. He went to the plumbing supply store where he'd become a regular customer. "I need to buy on credit," he told the owner, a stern woman named Patricia. "I'm good for it. Check my history." Patricia pulled up his purchases. Always paid in full, always on time, always professional. "I'll give you net 30 terms, but this is your only chance. Default, and you'll never buy from me again. You won't regret this." He finished Doña Carmen's kitchen in 22 days. The health inspector arrived, walked through slowly and finally smiled. "This is excellent work. Who did this?" Doña Carmen handed him Roberto's business card. That inspector became Roberto's first real business referral, sending him 3 more restaurant clients over the next 2 months. By the end of year 1, Roberto had earned 127,000 pesos, spent 89,000 on living expenses and materials, and saved 38,000 pesos. More valuable than the money was his reputation. He was becoming known as the young contractor who delivered impossible results at fair prices. The spring of Roberto's second year brought his most important decision yet. He had 64,000 pesos saved and a waiting list of clients. He could either continue working alone, doing maybe 1 or 2 jobs per month, or he could hire help and take on multiple projects simultaneously. The risk terrified him. Employees meant payroll, insurance, responsibility for someone else's livelihood. He hired Carlos, a 19-year-old kid from the boarding house where Roberto used to live. Carlos was eager but unskilled, struggling to support his widowed mother and 3 younger siblings. "I'll pay you 300 pesos per day," Roberto told him. "But you work hard, you learn fast, and you never cut corners. Can you do that?" Carlos nodded, his eyes bright with hope. "I won't let you down, Jefe." Training Carlos while working jobs stretched Roberto to his limits. There were days he wanted to quit, to go back to working alone where mistakes were his alone. But slowly Carlos learned, and as he learned, Roberto could bid on bigger projects. A small factory needed their office building renovated. The owner, a shrewd businessman named Raul, initially balked at Roberto's bid of 85,000 pesos. "I have contractors offering to do it for 60,000, Raul said. "And in 6 months, you'll be calling someone to fix their work." Roberto replied calmly, "I guarantee my work for 1 year. Anything breaks, I fix it free. Can they say that?" Raul hired him. The project took 2 months and netted Roberto 31,000 pesos after all expenses and Carlos's wages. But more importantly, that factory office became his portfolio piece. The project he photographed and showed to every potential client. By winter of year 2, Roberto employed 3 people, Carlos, plus 2 more laborers he'd trained from scratch. He'd upgraded from his studio to a small 2-bedroom apartment where 1 room served as his office. His toolbox, that original rusty inheritance, sat on a shelf in his office, now surrounded by thousands of pesos worth of modern equipment. He'd earned 340,000 pesos that year, saved 1 to 18,000 after expenses, and had to turn away clients because he was fully booked 3 months in advance. Don Ernesto stopped by his office one December evening. "You remember when you fixed my door?" "Of course. You gave me my first real chance. I've been watching you, mijo. You're building something real. Your father would be proud." Roberto couldn't speak around the lump in his throat. He just nodded. Year 3 brought Roberto's greatest challenge and greatest opportunity simultaneously. A developer named Vicente approached him with an audacious proposal. Renovate an entire apartment complex of 32 units. The contract was worth 1.2 million pesos, but it required Roberto to hire a crew of at least 20 workers and complete the project in 4 months. "I can't do it," Roberto said immediately. "I don't have the infrastructure." Vicente leaned back in his chair, studying him. "I've been asking around about you. Everyone says you're honest, your work is solid, and you finish on time. Those are rare qualities. This project will make or break you, but if you succeed, you'll never worry about finding work again." Roberto lay awake that entire night, running numbers, considering risks. He had 186,000 pesos saved, enough to cover payroll for perhaps 6 weeks if clients delayed payment. If anything went wrong, he'd lose everything. At dawn, he called Vicente. "I'll do it, but I need 400,000 pesos up front for materials and initial payroll." Done. Work starts Monday. Roberto hired 15 new workers, including a young female architect named Sophia, who just graduated but couldn't find work because construction was a man's field. He rented a small warehouse to store materials. He bought a used truck for 45,000 pesos to transport supplies. The project was chaos. 3 workers quit in the first week. A materials shipment arrived with the wrong tiles. The building inspector found code violations in the existing structure that needed correction before Roberto could proceed. At week 6, Roberto was 80,000 pesos over budget with another 10 weeks of work remaining. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. His hair started graying at 25 years old. Sophia found him sitting on the floor of an unfinished apartment at midnight, his head in his hands. "We're not going to make it," he said. "Yes, we are." Sophia spread blueprints across the floor. "Look, we're trying to do 32 custom renovations, but these units have identical layouts. If we standardize the finishes, same tiles, same fixtures, same layouts, we can work assembly line style. 3 teams of 5, each team completes 1 unit every 4 days. We'll finish in 11 weeks total under budget." Roberto stared at her. "Why didn't I think of that?" "Because you're too tired to think. Go home, sleep, let me handle tomorrow's scheduling." Sophia's system worked. They finished the complex in 14 weeks, 2 weeks ahead of the revised schedule. Vicente was ecstatic. He paid Roberto the remaining 800,000 pesos plus a 50,000 peso bonus. More importantly, he introduced Roberto to his entire network of developers and property owners. "This kid is the real deal," Vicente told everyone. By the end of year 3, Mendoza Construction had 23 full-time employees, had earned 2.8 million pesos in revenue, and had netted Roberto personally about 680,000 pesos after all expenses and payroll. Roberto promoted Sophia to operations manager, making her his partner. He promoted Carlos to crew chief. He moved the business into a real office with a showroom displaying their work. Year 4 brought commercial projects, restaurants, retail spaces, small office buildings. Year 5 brought his first new construction project, building 3 homes from the ground up for a small development. The rusty toolbox sat in a glass case in his showroom, lit from above, with a plaque that read, "Where it all began. Miguel Mendoza's Tools, 1975-2015. By his 28th birthday, Roberto employed 84 people, had completed over 300 projects, and had personal savings exceeding 2.3 million pesos. He'd bought a modest house, nothing extravagant but his, and drove a reliable truck with his company logo on the side. He thought about Hector sometimes, always with a mixture of sadness and anger that he couldn't quite resolve. The pain had dulled but never disappeared entirely. Then on a cold February evening, everything changed. The February rain fell in sheets, the kind of storm that turns streets into rivers and sends everyone running for shelter. Roberto was driving home from a site inspection, his windshield wipers struggling against the deluge, when his headlights caught 2 figures huddled under a bus shelter. An elderly couple soaked through, clinging to each other against the wind. Something about the man's posture made Roberto slow down, something familiar in the slope of his shoulders. He pulled over, hazard lights flashing, and got out into the rain. As he approached the shelter, recognition hit him like a physical blow. Hector. His brother had aged 20 years in 5. His expensive suits were gone, replaced by a thin jacket with holes in the sleeves. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. The woman beside him, rail-thin, trembling, must have been his wife, though Roberto had never met her. Hector looked up and their eyes met. Roberto watched his brother's face cycle through shock, recognition, shame, and desperate hope in the space of a heartbeat. "Roberto?" Hector's voice was barely audible over the rain. Roberto's hands clenched into fists. Every humiliation, every cold night, every moment of hunger crashed over him. This was the man who'd thrown him away like garbage, who'd sneered at their father's gift, who'd chosen money over family. "What happened to you?" Roberto asked, his voice flat. Hector's wife started crying. Hector wrapped an arm around her but couldn't meet Roberto's eyes. "Everything. I lost everything. The business failed. Bad investments. Debts. They took the house, the cars, everything. We've been living in shelters for 3 months. And now you need help." It wasn't a question. "I have no right to ask," Hector said, his voice breaking. "I know what I did. I know how I treated you. But Marta, my wife, she's sick. She needs medication. We need—" He choked on the words. Roberto stood there in the rain, water streaming down his face, tasting salt and knowing some of it was tears. Part of him wanted to walk away, to leave Hector drowning in the consequences of his cruelty. It would be justice. It would be fair. But another part, the part that remembered his father's patient hands, that remembered Don Ernesto's trust, that remembered every person who'd helped him when they had no reason to, that part knew what he had to do. "Get in the truck," Roberto said. "What?" "Get in the truck. You're soaked, she's sick, and there's a hospital 3 miles away. We'll get her seen by a doctor." Hector stared at him, tears now mixing openly with the rain. "Why would you help me? After everything I did?" Roberto thought about it, really thought about it. "Because someone once told me that honest work builds character, and I've worked too hard building mine to throw it away on revenge." He helped them into his truck, which was warm and dry and smelled of coffee and sawdust. Hector sat in the passenger seat, staring at the company logo on the dashboard. Mendoza Construction, Building Futures. "This is yours," Hector whispered. "Yeah, you did it. You actually did it. With Dad's worthless tools and a lot of help from people better than me." At the hospital, Roberto paid for Marta's examination and medication, 2,340 pesos that barely made a dent in his monthly income. Pneumonia, the doctor said. Treatable, but she needed rest, warmth, and proper food. While Marta slept in the examination room, Roberto and Hector sat in the waiting area, the silence between them heavy with 5 years of unspoken words. Finally, Hector spoke. "I was so wrong. About everything. About you. About what matters. About what Dad was trying to teach us. I thought money was everything. I thought I was so much smarter than you." "You are smarter than me," Roberto said quietly. "At numbers, at business strategy. You always were. But I'm not wiser. You understood what Dad was really saying. That toolbox wasn't worthless. It was a legacy of honest work, of using your hands to build something real. I just saw junk. I couldn't see the value. What happened to the money? The house sale? The inheritance?" Hector laughed bitterly. "I invested it all in a restaurant chain that looked perfect on paper. My business partner embezzled half and bankrupted the company. I lost everything in 18 months. Pride, as it turns out, is an expensive vice." Roberto absorbed this. "What do you need?" "I don't deserve—" "I'm not asking what you deserve. I'm asking what you need." Hector's composure finally cracked completely. He buried his face in his hands and sobbed. Deep, wrenching sounds that came from somewhere primal. "A chance. Just a chance to start over. A job, any job. I can do bookkeeping, accounting, payroll. I can work hard. I just need someone to trust me enough to try." Roberto thought about Carlos, about Sophia, about every person he'd given a chance to. He thought about his father's note. Build something beautiful. I need an accountant, Roberto said. Someone to manage payroll, handle taxes, organize our finances. The company's growing faster than I can manage alone. The job pays 8,000 pesos per month to start. You'd need to work your way up from there. Hector looked up, his eyes red and swollen. You'd hire me? After what I did? I'm hiring an accountant. Whether you're my brother is something we'll figure out over time. You work hard, you earn trust. You don't, you're fired. Those are the terms. I'll earn it. I swear I'll earn it. One more thing, Roberto said, his voice firm now. You apologize to Dad. He's dead. I know. We're going to the cemetery tomorrow, and you're going to tell him you were wrong, and that you're sorry. You're going to tell him what his worthless tools built, and you're going to mean it. Hector nodded, unable to speak. 3 months later, on a warm May afternoon, Roberto stood in the courtyard of his company's new headquarters, a renovated warehouse that now housed offices, a showroom, and storage space. 80 employees, their families, clients, and community members gathered for the official opening ceremony. Hector stood beside him, looking healthier now, wearing a modest but clean suit that Roberto had helped him buy. Marta, recovered and gaining weight, stood with Sofia and the other office staff. Don Ernesto was there, using a cane now but still sharp-eyed. Eduardo and Luz were there with their 2 children. Doña Carmen had catered the event. Her restaurant now one of the most popular in the city. Carlos stood with his mother and siblings, all of them employed or educated because of the opportunities Roberto had provided. Vicente, the developer who'd given Roberto his big break, stood to speak. I've worked with hundreds of contractors over 30 years. Roberto Mendoza is different. He doesn't just build structures. He builds futures. For his employees, for his community, for everyone he touches. When I asked him once what drove him, he showed me an old toolbox. He said, my father gave me this when I had nothing. It taught me that value isn't in how something looks. It's in what you build with it. The crowd applauded. Roberto stepped forward to speak, his heart pounding. Public speaking still terrified him. 15 years ago, I stood in the rain with everything I owned in 2 bags and a toolbox everyone said was worthless. I was angry, I was scared, and I wanted to give up. But I remembered something my father taught me. Honest work builds character. So I worked, I failed. I tried again. I learned that the worthless toolbox wasn't the tools. It was the skills, the determination, the choice to build instead of destroy. He gestured to Hector, who looked uncomfortable with the attention. My brother taught me something important too, even if he didn't mean to. He taught me that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing what kind of person you want to be. When you have the power to choose, do you become what hurt you, or do you build something better? Behind him, displayed in the lobby through glass windows, the original toolbox sat in its lit case. But now, surrounding it, were photos. Roberto at his first job site, Sofia reviewing blueprints, Carlos teaching new workers, the apartment complex, the restaurants, the homes, 300 projects and 5,000 lives touched. And beside the toolbox, a plaque with his father's handwritten note, preserved under glass. Build something beautiful, mijo. You have the hands for it. Roberto's voice thickened with emotion. Dad, I hope this is beautiful enough. Oh, the crowd erupted in applause. Roberto saw tears on faces throughout the courtyard. Doña Carmen dabbing her eyes, Eduardo hugging Luz, Carlos's mother smiling with pride. Hector approached him as the ceremony ended, people beginning to mingle and celebrate. Roberto, I need to say something. Okay. Every day I work here, I see what you built from nothing. From less than nothing. From the worst moment of your life and my worst act. You didn't just succeed despite me. You succeeded because you chose to be better than what happened to you. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to earn what you gave me in that hospital. Not just the job, the grace. Roberto put a hand on his brother's shoulder, then spend it building. That's what we do here. We build. That evening, after everyone had left, Roberto walked through the empty office, turning off lights, checking locks. He stopped in front of the toolbox display, pressing his palm against the glass. The tools looked even rustier now, even more outdated. In the modern world of power tools and computerized equipment, they were genuine antiques. But they'd built everything he had, not because they were special, but because he'd refused to see them as worthless. His phone buzzed. A text from Sophia. Tomorrow's schedule is ready. 3 new project bids to review. We might need to hire 10 more people. Roberto smiled. Build something beautiful, he whispered to his father's tools. That's what we're doing. That's what we'll keep doing. He locked the door and walked to his truck, no longer just his, but marked with the logo that represented 127 employees now, not counting the families they supported, the communities they served, the futures they were building. The rain had stopped. Stars emerged from behind the clouds, bright and cold and infinite. Roberto drove home, already planning tomorrow's work. 15 years after standing in the rain with nothing, Roberto Mendoza stood at the groundbreaking ceremony for Mendoza Housing Initiative, a non-profit arm of his company dedicated to building affordable homes for families living in poverty. The first project, 30 homes for families currently in shelters or temporary housing. Mendoza Construction now employed 847 people across 4 cities. Annual revenue exceeded 180 million pesos. But the numbers Roberto treasured most were different. 43 employees who'd started with no skills and were now master craftspeople. 67 scholarships funded for workers' children to attend university. 12 community centers built at cost for underserved neighborhoods. 189 affordable homes constructed below market rates. Carlos ran the commercial division. Sophia had become a partner and vice president. Hector managed all financial operations and had spent 3 years volunteering at shelters on weekends, giving back to the community that had temporarily housed him. Roberto's own children, twin daughters age 7, played in the dirt at the construction site, wearing tiny hard hats and carrying toy tools. They didn't know yet that their father had once slept in bus shelters. They just knew he built things, and that people smiled when they saw him. The original toolbox had been moved to the lobby of their largest office. But now in every Mendoza construction facility, a replica hung on the wall with the same plaque. Where it all began. Value isn't in how something looks, it's in what you build with it. Did you enjoy this story of transformation, forgiveness, and triumph? Roberto's journey from a bus shelter to building an empire shows us that our worth isn't determined by what others give or take from us. It's determined by what we choose to build with what we have. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories. Comment below and tell us which part moved you the most. Was it when Roberto slept in the bus shelter, when he hired his first employee, or when he chose forgiveness over revenge? Remember, you don't need perfect resources to build an extraordinary life. You need determination, integrity, and the courage to see value where others see worthlessness. Every successful person started with nothing. The difference is they started. Share this story with someone who's going through a difficult time. Someone who needs to remember that beginnings don't determine endings. Choices do. Your current situation is not your final destination. See you in the next inspirational story. Keep building something beautiful.